Hello, here I am again in the name of the sovereign creator of heaven and earth, the Lord Jesus Christ. We're continuing my exposition of my translation of Genesis. We come now to a rather unpleasant episode. It occupies chapter 34, Dinah and Shechem. I'll read verses 1 through 7 to begin. Dinah, Leah's daughter, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. When Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, prince of the land, saw her, he took her and lay with her and violated her. His soul became attached to Dinah, Jacob's daughter, and he loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this woman for me as a wife." When Jacob heard that Shechem had defiled his daughter Dinah, his sons were in the field with the livestock. Jacob kept quiet until they came. Then Hamor, Shechem's father, went out to Jacob to speak with him, and Jacob's sons came in from the field when they heard it. The men were indignant and very angry because he had brought shame on Israel by sleeping with Jacob's daughter, a thing which should not be done in that way. For the moment, let's see a couple of things here. Dinah went out to see the daughters of the land. It appears that she went out alone, which was not a good idea, and maybe it wasn't, quote, correct in the culture at that time. I don't know. Of course, it would be natural for her to want to make friends with other girls as long as it was done in the right way, all right. However, she certainly did not expect to be the victim of an impetuous action and be taken captive as she was. Verse 26 later on says that that's Naphtali or Simeon and Levi, they took Dinah out of Shechem's house, which means that he kept her. In fact, he did not let her go home. Now, it says here, when Jacob heard about it, if Shechem had caught Dinah out in the open, which appears to be the case, there must have been witnesses. And when Dinah did not return, her mother would have wanted to know why. And such a thing would certainly be talked about. Jacob would have heard about it before long. Now, verse 7 says that the sons came in when they heard it. In other words, Jacob had certainly sent someone running to call his sons. Now, curiously here in verse 7, we get the first use of the word Israel referring to the community, because in the very next phrase that talks about the daughter of Jacob, so Israel here is referring to the community. It's the first time that happens since God had changed his name. Now, verse 7 ends, that should not be done in that way. In other words, there was obviously a correct way to get a wife, only, of course, Shechem didn't do that. He didn't follow the right way. Now, let's go on and read verses 8 through 17. Then Hamor spoke with them, saying, "The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him as a wife, and intermarry with us by giving us your daughters and taking our daughters for yourselves, and live with us, and the land will be before you. Live and trade in it and acquire property in it." Then Shechem said to Dinah's father and her brothers, "Let me find favor in your eyes, and I will give whatever you say to me. You may greatly increase the dowry and the gift that you require of me, and I will give whatever you say to me. Only give me the young woman as a wife." Then Jacob's sons answered Shechem and Hamor his father with deceit, because he had defiled Dinah their sister, and they said to them, "We cannot do this thing to give you our sister to an uncircumcised man, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we consent to you. If you will become like us, having every male among you be circumcised, then we will give you our daughters, and we will take your daughters for ourselves, and we will dwell with you, and we will become one people. But if you will not listen to us and be circumcised, we will take our daughter and leave." Just one thing here, two things actually. Verse 8, then Hamor spoke with them. Obviously, the sons had arrived they probably arrived about the same time. Maybe the sons got there a little bit earlier. And also, as we'll see, Hamor was accompanied by his son. Now, I sort of like that young man, Shechem. He did not try to escape his responsibility. He had been overcome by passion, but he took full responsibility for the consequences. I'll even give you more than I'm supposed to give you, whatever. I admit. He didn't hide. He took full responsibility for what he did. Okay, but the sons of Jacob had an ulterior motive, as we will see. Now let's go on and read verses 18 through 24. Now their words pleased Hamor and Shechem his son, and the young man did not hesitate to do this, because he loved Jacob's daughter, and he was the most noble of all his father's household. Then Hamor and his son Shechem went to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of the city, saying, "These men are at peace with us, so let them dwell in this land and trade in it, for indeed the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters as wives for ourselves, and let us give our daughters to them. But the men will only consent to live with us, so that we may become one people, if every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised. Will not their cattle and their goods and all their beasts of burden be ours? So let us consent to them, and they will dwell with us." And all who went out of the gate of the city heeded Hamor and his son Shechem. Every male was circumcised of all who went out of the gate of his city. Now, notice in verse 23, obviously Hamor hoped to gain the upper hand. He thought he could impose himself on Jacob and get the advantage out of it all. Now, when it talks about those who go out of the gate of the city, that's probably the adult men who, shall we say, they were the electors. They were the ones who had a vote. Verse 9 makes it clear that did not include the children. Verse 29, sorry. No, obviously, the men were old enough to vote. They had to be consulted, and they had to agree with the proposal, as they did. Now let's read verses 25 through 31 that will end chapter 34. On the third day, while they were suffering, that's the men of Shechem, two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword and went into the city, which was unguarded, and killed every male. They killed Hamor and Shechem his son with the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and left. Jacob's sons came upon the dead and plundered the city because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks, their herds, and their donkeys, both in the city and in the field. They took all the children and the women as captives. They plundered all the goods and everything in the houses. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have made trouble for me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land, to the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Since I am few in number, if they gather together against me and attack me, I will be destroyed, both I and my household." But they said, "Should he treat our sister like a prostitute?" As I argued last video, when they stayed in Succoth at least 10 years, probably 13 or 15. So by that time, these two sons, Simeon and Levi, were grown men. That's how come they could do that. And how come Dinah was attractive and so on. Only 2 of the sons actually did the massacre, but after that, all of the sons went in to plunder the town. Verse 27, Jacob's sons came upon the dead and plundered the city. They took everything, flocks, herds, etc., everything in the houses. Notice what it says in verse 29. They took all the children and the women as captives. Okay, so what did they do with the women? They didn't kill them, so what did they do with them? I say that they married them. Where else would they find a wife for so many men? Okay, have you ever thought about that? In Acts chapter 7, verses 15 and 16, Stephen states that Jacob's sons were buried in Shechem. And Joshua 24, verse 32, explicitly states that Joseph's bones were buried there in Shechem, in the text. Well, since that was where they got their wives and possessions, it would be perfectly appropriate for them to be buried there. Why not? Okay, now let's go on to chapter 35. I will read first verses 1 through 8. Then God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there, and build an altar there to God who appeared to you when you fled from Esau your brother." Then Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, "Put away the foreign gods that are among you, purify yourselves, and change your clothes. Then let us arise and go up to Bethel, and I will build an altar there to God who answered me in the day of my distress and has been with me on the way I have gone." So they gave Jacob all the foreign gods that were in their possession, all along with the earrings that were in their ears. And Jacob hid them under the oak tree that was near Shechem. Then they set out, and the terror of God fell on the surrounding cities, and they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. And Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel, in the land of Canaan, he and all the people with him. And he built an altar there and called the place El Bethel, because God had revealed himself to him there when he fled from his brother. Now Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died, and she was buried below Bethel under the oak tree, and he called its name Allon Bakuth. Okay, now that Jacob is finally in the land of Canaan, because Succoth was on the other side of the Jordan, wasn't there yet, God talks to him again. And God told him to go to Bethel and to dwell there. But apparently, he didn't stay there very long. He kept on going south. That's just what it seems like. I can't prove that. Now, this bit about the foreign gods, Rachel must have given up the family idol she had stolen from her brother. Well, since Jacob had sworn to Laban back in Gilead he would not use them, they were no longer important. But also any slaves that they had might have had their own gods, and the women from Shechem may have had gods. And also, when he tells them to change their clothes, maybe the widows were using widows' clothes, and so Jacob told them to. And also, as we see here now, the earrings. Who had the earrings? Well, probably exactly the women from Shechem. They probably had the earrings, which may or may not have had some religious significance as well. Jacob never made use of those idols that Rachel stole. They were apparently buried under that oak tree. Now, as you may recall, when Jacob was running away from Esau, he called the place Bethel. That's God's house of God, God's house. But here he calls it El Bethel. Here, the God of the house of God. Well, okay. God had spoken to Jacob several times in the interim. Actually wrestled with him there at Peniel. By now, Jacob knows God better. He adds the name, just by the way. Now in verse 8, we come to a very curious circumstance. Deborah, Rebekah's nurse. Rebekah's own death is not mentioned. We have no record of when Rebekah died. But that of her nurse is. I believe that we may deduce that Rebekah had certainly died, probably a good while earlier, which is probably why Jacob stayed over 10 years in Succoth, by the way. In any case, we know that Rebekah was buried at Machpelah. That's in 49:31. So she was buried along with Isaac in Machpelah. Now, Allen Backward means the oak of weeping, named for Deborah and her death as it happened. Now let's go on and read verses 9 through 15. Then Then God appeared to Jacob again after he had come from Paddan Aram and blessed him. And God said to him, "Your name is Jacob, no longer shall your name be called Jacob, but Israel shall be your name." So he called his name Israel. God also said to him, "I am Almighty God. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation, even a company of nations, shall come from you, and kings shall come from your loins. And the land that I gave to Abraham and Isaac I give to you, and I will give the land to your descendants after you." And Jacob went up from him in the place where he had spoken with him. And Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he had spoken with him, where God had spoken with him, a pillar of stone, and he poured a drink offering on it and poured oil on it. And Jacob called the name of the place where God had spoken with him Bethel. Actually, he had called it that a long time ago. Now, going back to verse 10, God says your name is now Israel, but he'd already said that. God had already changed his name back at Peniel, but here we have it again. I don't know why. That's here. Well, it says here that God appeared to Jacob. He had spoken to him a couple times. He had actually wrestled with him there, but here apparently he actually becomes visible. Finally, Jacob is where you're supposed to be, in Canaan. Now we come to God's name. The name is actually, in Hebrew, it's El Shaddai, which means, in fact, Almighty God, which is how I translated it. Now here, God just repeats what he said already numerous times about giving the land and so on to first Abraham, then Isaac, and now Jacob and his descendants. And just by the way, in 13 says he went up. Well, where else? Verse 15 called the place he'd already done that. And of course, God appeared to him more than once at that spot. So let's go on now to verses 16 through 22. Then they departed from Bethel. When there was some distance to come to Ephraim, Rachel began to give birth, and her labor was hard. And it came to pass, as she was having hard labor, that the midwife said to her, "Do not fear, you will have this son also." And as her soul was departing, for she died, she called his name Benoni, but his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephraim, that is Bethlehem. And Jacob set up a pillar on her grave, which is the pillar of Rachel's grave to this day. Then Israel moved on and pitched his tent beyond Migdal Eder. And it came to pass, while Israel dwelt in that land, that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard about it. Okay. Verse 16, they departed from Bethel. We are not told how long they stayed, but apparently it wasn't all that long, and God had told them to stay there, to dwell there. Now, poor Rachel. She was probably at least 15 to 20 years older than when she had born Joseph. And those 15, 20 years didn't do her any good in terms of getting pregnant and having another baby. So her labor was hard. And in fact, she died. She called the baby Ben-Oni, that means son of my sorrow, but his father called him Benjamin, which means son of my right hand. Now, I've never understood why Jacob didn't take Rachel's body to Machpelah. It was only about 20 miles on down. I don't understand that. Why didn't he take Rachel? We know he said that he buried Leah in Machpelah, but why didn't he bury Rachel? I don't know. Text doesn't say. He didn't do it though. He buried her there, set up a pillar. Now we have the problem of Reuben going into his father's concubine. Israel heard about it, and that comes up again in the blessing in chapter 49. And Jacob will mention that fact. Okay, now let's go to the end of this chapter. I'll read verses, the second half of 22 through 29, which will bring this video to a close. Now the sons of Jacob were 12. The sons of Leah, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. And the sons of Rachel, Joseph, and Benjamin. The son of Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant, Dan and Naphtali. The sons of Zilpah, Leah's maidservant, Gad and Asher. These were the sons of Jacob who were born to him in Paddan Aram. And Jacob came to his father Isaac at Mamre, or Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac sojourned. Now the days of Isaac were 180 years, and Isaac breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his people, old and full of days. And Esau and Jacob his sons buried him. Now we need to comment about in verse 26. It says these were the sons born in Paddan, but of course the 12th one, Benjamin, was not born there. He was born in Canaan. So that was strictly speaking, but maybe, the count is just giving a round number. Although also Dinah was actually born up there, and she would make 12, although she, of course, was not a son. Now, the text is very clear that Isaac was buried, in fact, in Machpelah. I have to find that. I get the impression that Jacob just didn't want to see his father all that much. He didn't actually get there until probably within the last 10 years of Isaac's life. He really took his time to get back to Hebron. Anyway, that's what we have for tonight. Thanks for watching, and God bless.